Confirmation of minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to read the minutes that Tim circulated before? And having done that, would somebody like to move that they be accepted? Cody, thank you, and seconded. Jack, thank you. So would we like to just raise our hands if we believe that they're true and accurate record? Okay, lovely, thank you. Business arising from minutes. Tim, would you like to take us through this section? Just particularly because I've got unusual layout on my document here, I'll just sort that out.
Certainly. So there were really only two actions. One was a continuing action for the preparation of an A4 size review of electric vehicles versus fossil fuelled vehicles, and I understand that Councillor Koch and Councillor Shanks were going to work on that. It's not absolutely urgent, but if it was able to go into the Climate Emergency Action Plan document, that would be a really great little case study. And the other one is to incorporate the outcomes of the workshop that we had on community actions. We had a really great workshop where we identified a whole lot of things. And I think we're going to go back and have a look at some of those tonight. And then as the document is, we incorporate the feedback from the consultant and complete the document, we need to make sure that they're put in. So I've just suggested that that's a bit of a checklist. I also did some work on a future scenario, and I've put that into the document if anybody's interested in having a look or making a better job of it or coming up with an alternative. But that idea was that we would have a positive future scenario for how town of Gawler would be by 2050.
Thanks, Tim. So moving on to item number 5, the council reports. So starting with 5.1.1, and that was the report that I think has been circulated previously, or just circulated prior to this meeting. Is that Tim you're talking to, that one?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool.
Happy to talk through that. So it was just really interesting to be able to access the 2019-20 data and aggregate that together, work with our accounts team to see that we broadly agree on the costs. There's still some gaps in the data, still some water. There's some more we need to do on water emissions intensity. But broadly speaking, we've pulled everything together and I've done an updated greenhouse gas inventory. So now we can sort of compare what's happened this year and how does it look compared to last year. The other thing I thought might be really useful for council, and I'd like to seek the working group's feedback on this, is about just putting everything in terms of costs right up front. So we actually spend a lot of money on water and energy, and I've put that in a pie chart. The first of the pie charts on page 2 really shows that we spend as much on water as we really do for everything else, significant amounts on electricity, quite a small amount on renewable energy as green power, and lots on transport fuels, with about $100,000 a year on diesel and about $30,000, $36,000 a year on petrol. And then pipe gas is still quite big in terms of the overall costs of that as well. And then the greenhouse gas emissions actually look a little bit different because they've got different emissions intensities for the different consumption sources. So water doesn't show up as a big one there. I think it's bigger than it shows, but I don't have a reliable emissions factor to allocate to that yet. Certainly electricity emissions and street lighting are a really big chunk from our electricity consumption. Transport and petrol, diesel and petrol emissions are fairly high, and our natural gas is 12% this last year, which is quite high, and it's increased. So then there's a bit of a comparison of 2018-19 compared to 2019-20, and it does show that the emissions have dropped a little bit overall, but most of that gain has been because South Australia's electricity emissions factor has continued to diminish because of all of the wind and solar that's now going into the system. So it's not really something that we've achieved, it's something that South Australia has achieved and every consumer across Australia has contributed to through the renewable energy target. I put the renewable energy use as a percentage because I think it would be useful to understand that, and we are at about 20% renewable energy, which meets the council's public commitment. About 12% green power and probably about 10% from our on-site power. We haven't really been able to get the full 12 months data together yet. I was waiting till Jack was back from leave because he's got access to a software program that's got the past 12 months data for the Gawler Admin Centre. And I now have access to a new software program that's got access to the Gawler Administration Centre and the Sports and Community Centre, but only for the last 2 months. And we've hoped to put on the swimming pool sometime, and as we get more solar systems going onto council's buildings, we hope to put them all onto this Fronius software and be able to follow our progress.
I think the 12% the pipe gas and actually that's the boilers.
Yeah, the pipe gas is virtually all of the boilers. There's a little bit at, I think, the Civic Centre.
Yeah, with the kitchens.
With the kitchens. And also, Catherine and I learned yesterday that Bryce has a number of cylinders attached to other buildings as well.
Community centre.
Yeah, and because they're bottled gas, not piped gas, we're not picking it up yet. So we've got to actually do some work to pick it up. So all of this is discovery and capture and good work. We're not quite there yet. So we've got figures, but they're not the absolute best figures yet. But all organisations go through this. Really interesting to look at the community emissions as well, because there's been, from the original snapshot data that we got several months ago, we've got a new snapshot data which shows that quite significant changes, and I can't explain all of those changes. I do note that transport emissions have increased for Gawler, and it makes sense that we're a very transport reliant city because of the distance from Adelaide and all of the transport, all the travel that people do. It also doesn't really show up the public transport from the train very well at all. So it's a number as a point of reference. I wouldn't say it's the best number to base all decisions on.
I think there's elements around that as they're talking with those figures as being essentially a proportion. So if stationary energy use and emissions has gone down and reduced the total, it may be that has had an impact on the proportion of the transport emissions that are left and makes them a larger piece of pie. But we'd have to have a look at the raw figures to estimate that.
Apologies. Tim and I have actually spoken about what the electrification will hope to achieve, and one of the stumbling blocks is actually getting that data out of the state government to see what we're actually achieving through that network. And I think once we get that, that'll really help, hopefully close that loop, I think, on that transport emissions number.
Paul had a question for us. Oh, a couple of questions, go for it.
First, comments and questions. The first one is just a comment on page, with the pie chart with the cost of energy and water. It's staggering how much we spend on water. I think there needs to be like a behavioural shift in the way that we see open spaces, move away from endless acres of green lawn, that's the problem, and more native species, and maybe less lawn, and more water harvesting and sustainable landscapes. So that's a really good pie chart to illustrate that point. The next one is just looking at our emissions. on page, whatever it is, with that little bars. And it does note that we now have an emissions factor, which is reduced in South Australia, which is good. So does that mean that over time, because I think I heard Dan Van Pelican on the radio the other day saying that by 2025 or something that South Australia will be 100% renewable. So does that mean that the state government is all these someone else is doing all that work for us? Because realistically, when we look at that, especially when we're consuming power in the middle of the day when there's an excess of solar, potentially we're actually already using a lot of renewable energy. So any comments on that?
Well, you're absolutely right in that everything that we draw down off the grid, because the grid's getting greener, we're getting closer and closer to zero. So yes, I suppose in a sense, everybody in South Australia is kind of piggybacking off that broader process. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely beneficial, and that will help us get to where we need to be.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering whether we need to take that into account on the amount of green energy we need to buy at the end of the day. That's nothing. And the last question is, with a comment, when we look at the street lighting, that's one of our biggest energy consumptions. Now, we're going to be converting those to LEDs in the near future, so that's going to actually reduce our energy need. So are we taking that into account in our calculations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also one of those things where we have to be clear around the benefit of displaying things in pie charts, because you never get to zero on a pie chart, and actually being able to show the quantum of the change over time. So I think we'll be looking at pie charts are useful for us to identify priority actions, but then in terms of the net reduction that we're aiming for, then other graphs such as we've used particularly useful. And I know Tim wanted to say something about green power.
Thank you.
If that's to respond to your query.
Yep.
Just on that first one, I guess, or that second one, this is a snapshot in time. So whilst the street lighting reduction is projected into the future, is not going to show in the 2019-20 data, but it's going to make it a whole lot easier to make that progress in the time. And then I think that's really smart, is doing so much by efficiency, and then you can actually find other ways to purchase your electricity differently or offset it down the track. So yeah, really great. I really do appreciate you noting that how much we're spending on water. I think that is a whole other area that we should be involved with. It's not directly showing up as an emission yet, but there are emissions. And the other thing is that there's a climate change resilience response. There was a paper that's going up on waterproofing Gawler or something like that, and I didn't have a chance to comment on it, but it had in the box of the risks and opportunities a number of things, but I don't think it really had in there the absolute opportunity for us to be more climate resilient by greening up Gawler with recycled water, because then when you've actually got really bad droughts and you've got stage 2 and 3 water restrictions, you don't have to switch everything off if you've got recycled water in keeping your city green. So there's other potential benefits of addressing water from different suppliers as well. Just on the idea of South Australia's emissions factor continuing to reduce, there's a little bit of uncertainty and danger in this, because whilst we can see that at the moment the way state-based emissions factors are calculated, we're doing really well, the rest of the country may soon wake up and say, hey, if we're paying for it, you can't claim it all yourselves, and they might take it back. Because nothing's solved in law, then all of that is still really messy. So I think that it would be too soon to say, let's sit back and relax and not worry about purchasing any renewable energy sources, but we have to be conscious that it's a moving feast before we sign on the dotted line. And that's why the advocacy and the engagement's really important.
And I think because we're not in control of that process, and that it could reverse in the future if policy settings change and stuff. But I know Tom had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to add that, we sort of account for renewable energy that we might be putting in the future, but we sort of not accounting the transition to the electrifying our transport, which would add the demand to the existing kind of to energy consumption as a result of that. So I think what would be useful to have at the moment we can convert your mileage and utilize that, convert that to the kilowatt hours in a battery storage that we need to fill in the void to sort of electrify to your transport in sort of and calculate based on that how much future demand that will put on the council's kind of budget.
That's an excellent point, Tom, because that is a concrete way that we can quantify that potential increase in demand.
Yeah, it's more realistic, and we're talking about like achieving 100% renewable for, as say, like we haven't transitioned out, you know, like to renewable transport, like any of the fleets or governments or local governments. So like, and the target is 2030 to be net. Yeah.
I think you might have been talking about the possible trajectory as opposed to what the actual target is. I think there's the possibility of it coming in before that. But it's actually interesting because that point is true of a number of different things, because as we're looking at electrifying different functions, so whether it's heat pumps for the pool or whether it's, you know, we're discovering that there's a whole lot of gas, bottled gas that is used for instantaneous hot water showers for footy clubs and things like that. As we're identifying those, you know, clearly the best way of dealing with that is probably some kind of electrification. Yeah, that's right, but it does actually mean that, you know, electricity is not going to just be minus whatever we adapt. We're actually going to be adding on to what we use to some extent. But there's also a lot of opportunity for energy efficiency measures, and I know we haven't spent loads of time on that, but I heard this really good quote the other day, and it was something about the greenest energy is the energy you don't use. So I think that's, sorry? Yeah, yeah. So I think, you know, that's we, you know, that can't get lost in the kind of noise around other things. So. Yes, Paul.
Just one comment about electrification of transport. AEVA, for example, have always been advocating that you recharge your vehicle at night using off-peak power, that you don't actually put more pressure on the existing grid, especially when it's in high demand in the morning and the evening. So they've always talked about using energy when it's available and it's you know, it's off-peak, so that it might actually smooth itself out a bit. That's yeah.
That's a little bit more related to the older style of energy generation, because at the moment, like as it's changing, some of the peaks are coming in the day. So yeah, yeah. So
middle of the day, late in the evening, when they might get
that's right.
Like, if you encourage your people that work within a council, you know, officers and stuff like that, and if they buy their electric vehicle, they would charge utilizing your infrastructure, and therefore, you know, like you would be balancing more demand on your site by sort of letting your workers be participated in a network management as a part of the and stability of the network as a part of this integrated. Let's get them vehicles. I think everybody will be encouraged to buy vehicles, and you know, like, and a Gola council should offer free parking, like, you know, if that happens ever, or like when that happens, you know, so you can, if you have electric vehicle, you have dedicated park somewhere on the street.
I'm constantly getting on our software package a little message which says use more of your solar generated power throughout the day. We're not using enough. We're generating far more than what we're actually using. So if we're plugging in throughout the day,
at certain points in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I suppose there's always, you know, some mismatch. But yeah, well, I'm sure we can get there. And in terms of, you know, what the policy setting needs to be in terms of council staff or, you know, fringe benefits or whatever, well, then that's clearly a matter for down the track a little bit once we figure out, you know, I mean, it could be that you know, just charge them like a customer. I mean, there's all those kind of options. Of course, yeah. There's a lot of stuff to be sorted out over time.
But yeah, you might as well pay the penalty if you export. Like, for example, I pay price to export at the moment. Yeah, so I pay $1 sometimes for exporting. So, like that's kind of reality. We'll be more sort of a behind the meter kind of a operation.
Thanks, Tom. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question to the working group in that would you be supportive of the information used in that emission summary to go into a council report
October.
for October?
That was our sentiment. We thought we'd planned.
I mean, perhaps if anybody had any reservations, they could raise their hand. No? Okay, good. All right. Excellent. I think you've got the group's approval there. Okay, so moving on to the Renewable Energy Feasibility Project Update, item number 5.1.2.
I am pleased to advise of two new pieces of information. One is that the acquisition plan's been signed off and we're ready to press the go button. It'll probably happen on Monday next week now because we've got a few awkward days ahead of us. But that means we can get the scoping done, go out to market and get the scoping done, which will inform the much bigger stage 2 of the feasibility study. And the second bit of information was relating to a meeting that Catherine and I had with Bryce yesterday on the master plan for the sports precinct, or the Essex Park, which is a swimming pool all the way down to the sports and community centre. And there's some really interesting opportunities there. We think that it would definitely benefit from having an overall master plan approach to energy management and renewable energy, to water management, and I think to some of the agreements that we might have with some of the sports centres or the occupiers of the buildings, so that we could have things like agreements to be transitioning to zero waste and that type of thing as well. So Catherine and I were going to put down a few notes and points and then share it to this group out of session, because we have to get it back to Bryce in the next couple of weeks, just in this preliminary stage. We'll have another go later on, but it would be great if this working group can have some feedback. So we'll send it out in the near future.
Just an option, an option to consider if possible. Would an out of session think tank be a good way forward? If we grab a meeting room one afternoon and just do an out of session get together and go through the plan?
Yeah, I think I'd be happy to make sure that something like that happened. It was actually really great that Bryce contacted us, and at a relatively early stage in the process, where our suggestions can be really additive to his process, rather than it just being trying to retrofit ideas onto other ideas that are already well advanced. And so I think there was really, really great opportunities. I think we added some value even just in the chat that we had, and it would be really great if we could formalise that through the group and make sure that it's more comprehensive, because we only just got given that document in the meeting, so we didn't really have a chance to review it. So we can circulate that and get more input into it, so that we make sure we tick off all the ideas that we can. Yeah.
And just so everyone's aware, that master plan has resulted in Carbethan being put on hold for the time being. So once Carbethan's back up on the agenda, and we're probably looking at 21, 22, I think we go through the same process. I think, and hopefully we're still, as a working group, or at least have those communication channels open to work on large scale projects like that.
Yeah, Tim?
So back to the feasibility project, we thought we would actually just include the Essex Park master plan as one particular thing that we would ask the consultant to comment on in helping us to scope up the next steps, because that looks really useful, particularly since the pool is a big energy consumer.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential for generating energy on the site that is then reused on the site. So, okay, thank you, Tim. So then, is that the Gawler Aquatic Centre update?
This one's, we've just been negotiating the nuts and bolts of how to go about it. So there's really good support from council to have this as part of the budget. It's wrapped into another project where they would do the actual detailed design. So there's a pathway to doing that before we can finish the detailed design and go back to council with a recommendation, an updated recommendation and detailed design. We have to actually get everybody on side and all of the staff up and do a walkthrough with the consultant, the potential consultant, because just because one consultant approached us and provided us with an option doesn't mean that we won't go to open market. But they're supportive of that, so they're prepared to come out and walk through and just talk through, well, where would it go? What would it interfere with? How would you plumb it in? How would you size it? All of those types of things, because there's a myriad of problems that can be raised, but we don't know how easily they're solved until we sort of have that walk through, and then it can go into the detailed design. So that will happen shortly. It'll happen internally with staff first, and then down the track we might do a second walkthrough with the working group and other interested parties like Karina.
Thanks, Tim. Have you got something?
It really is just ongoing on what Tim was saying. The main issue with the aquatic centre is the ageing infrastructure, and I think the important part of this preliminary site visit is really just to get an understanding of what's there, what do we have to deal with, just what's involved in terms of plumbing. Is it just simply, we add them in, pumps have to be upgraded? There's a whole myriad of discussion that sort of has arisen, and Tim and I have been on this now for about a month, I'd say, with the sport and rec people on the aquatic centre. So, and in amongst all this is the redevelopment of the aquatic centre with the change rooms and the new flooring and everything like that. So it's quite a, it's almost still a construction site, so we have to be wary of that. And I think we're down there in a week or two, a fortnight. We've got our first sort of site visit just to see what's going on, and we'll try and make some assessments from that visit.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions?
So that upgrade is going to be funded by Karina, is that right? Or partly, or?
No. Bryce has actually identified some funding in his project for this,
okay.
But we're yet to, once we know, accurately what the final amount will be. Right. We may talk to Karina, but I think we've discussed getting Karina in at the beginning. All right. As part of the process, but Bryce has identified funding.
Oh, right. I'll just...
For the detailed design.
Yep.
For the detailed design. And then Karina would be funding the hardware.
That might be financing.
Financing, that's not funding, but financing. I just wonder, has Karina got an upper limit or not?
No, well, I mean, clearly there's limits. Yeah. And no, they don't. They're quite very supportive of this work, and they're willing to fundraise. The issue would be is that it might take them a little bit of time, because clearly they actually, while they have a certain amount of money in the kitty already, that they've kind of been saving up for these processes, and that increases over time before they dispense it. But with a larger project, it might take them a little bit of time to do the public fundraising. But so that gets us over that kind of upfront capital cost barrier.
That's fantastic. Yep, it's good.
And it's also important to note that this occurs after the season, so we're looking. Once we look at scoping this out, it doesn't impact.
No, you can't do anything.
No, we can't get in there. So
so it's next winter.
Yes.
And I think it's also important to note that the gas use in the pool went up significantly in the last year as well. So, I mean, clearly there were some issues, but when we were originally looking at this, the proportion of the emissions that came from the pool was less than, it was I think about 7% we estimated originally, and now it's at 12% of the total council emissions. So it's interesting, because there's obviously clearly the potential for increasing in emissions if things don't quite work right, even just over 1 year, and that's that's one kind of period of difficulties with the equipment, and that has such a significant emission impact. So yeah, it's certainly interesting to see how much the figure increased.
Even with the discussions with the sport and rec staff, and we mentioned earlier it's ageing infrastructure, the deep end is a diving end which is not used, which when the pool is open, there has to be a staff member at that deep end. So there's a aquatic centre that really doesn't require all that, 1 million litres, I think it was, or something like that. It's quite significant. So there was even discussion around, do we need a diving end to the pool, which is, I think, 3.6, or get rid of it, or fill it with concrete and just reduce the water.
Yeah. You take the diving board away, haven't you?
I know, I think it's still there, but yeah.
We've taken the duck away. That's it.
Okay. So moving on to 5.2, the Climate Emergency Action Plan Progress Summary. Is that you, Tim?
I don't know if it's me or all of us. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I'll just add my little bit, but I think there's quite a lot of things that have happened actually, and we've got the feedback from the consultant. We've started to look at incorporating that feedback into the document. I rejigged the document, put the community stuff up the front instead of at the back, because immediately when we first started, we wanted to ensure that we got the council's thinking in order. But actually, it will be the community that really want to see this plan as an outward-facing document. So it makes sense to put them up front, and then what we're doing as a whole town of Gawler, and then have the council's part at the back, which is just ensuring that we're doing our part. I then sort of stopped working on that for a while and thought about the suggestion by the consultant that we have a 2-page summary document, and we'd always intended to do a 2-page or a 4-page summary document, so that we're really just communicating the nuts and bolts of what we're going to achieve. I had a go at doing something on 2 pages and completely failed and thought, nah, this isn't going to work. So I really think that a 4-page document is possible. And I think we can do a lot, particularly with this idea and what this city of San Luis Obispo did with their diagrams, just showing a simple reduction chart and their key steps towards carbon neutrality. If we did some things like that, then I think we could communicate very effectively some of the key steps that we as a working group are recommending in terms of transitioning to renewables, switching to electric vehicles, getting rid of gas, and tackling the other emissions as well. And that's something we want to help our community do as well. And it's also supporting the circular economy and the green economy, and getting rid of our waste emissions would be a really good thing. So we can communicate that quite simply. I'm not sure the best way to do it. I don't like my attempt very much. I wondered if other people would like to do a 4-page attempt to capture the essence of the Climate Emergency Action Plan, or whether they want to have a go on mine and improve it.
I think we're still a bit early. I think we just need to get a bit more done, and then I think we might be ready. But all kudos to Tim.
Well, it's something I think we should be thinking about, because I think we were caught a bit short by not having done it, because you can't really, you've got these 2 types of tensions. One is it's got to be really simple, immediate, anybody can pick it up and understand it, and the other ones you've got to have the substance there, and that's what this one from the city in the USA have done. So anyway, that was just an attempt.
I'm just going to ask, is it designed for councils and council staff, or is it for the general public? Okay, right. All right, thank you.
Definitely the general public, especially, when they're 99% of the emissions. I think that's really important. I also think that the other thing that the council is key to is not just about getting its own house in order. It's actually about playing a facilitation role and a coordination role to help the community react as well. I think there's that. That's what government does. It acts as a coordinating organisation that enables us to collectively act as well. So I think there's elements there that can be reflected in the plan. Okay, any further questions on that bit before we move on?
It's just around recommendation of people sort of uptaking solar. From my understanding, if you haven't got a battery, it's not a good option, because, you know, you're actually putting stuff into the grid when, you know, for 2 cents and buying it back for 5, you know, whatever. So, you know, if you think that if you put solar panels up and you're going to make a profit on it, you're not going to do that anymore. So what will we have to be recommending if you put solar panels on, you need a battery, or you consume it behind the meter? Spend their money or economise. I think our role is to show a pathway on how they can act to reduce their emissions, and I think people would have different appetites for different activities. But Tom, I'm sure you'll have more to add to that.
So under the one retail, we will be able to exchange energy that way, and that's no solar harvest, no. But that's kind of, it almost works with a virtual power plant. But, you know, as Catherine said, this is something that we maybe could propose as a kind of future of a goal by 2050, and we encourage people to go on the journey together. So we exchange the energy like locally rather than buying it from outside.
And also I think we have to acknowledge that some of the current agreements around solar panel energy generation and you know, input tariffs or, you know, feedback income that you might get is controlled by, you know, whoever is their current energy supplier, and that there may be future alternative options as well, and new ways of using the marketplace to provide a diversity of offerings for the community. I think that's something that would probably fall in the feasibility study in terms of testing some of those ideas to see if they're actually going to be beneficial to both the people and also the community more generally in the council. Sorry, Tim. Tim, did you?
I think the second phase of the feasibility study will enable us to have a look at some of this, and when we're looking at how could council's investment in energy infrastructure also benefit the community. That'll be a question we'll address. The other thing is trying to sort of pick exactly how it will go will always be different. I think the market's going to evolve faster than we can imagine it. And it may even end up being that batteries get thrown in with the deals and the price comes down significantly in the future. Whatever it is, I think we just have to be supportive to sort of find ways to assist the communities to access solar electricity and energy systems or cheaper power from accredited renewables where we can. But anyway, we'll go through the process and that'll inform us more.
Yes, Paul.
Just another comment from that report from that town in California, I can't pronounce its name. It talked about food waste and methane production. Just wanted to comment that Norm is actually looking at rolling out your green bins to everybody and put your food waste in it, and then that'll be composted. It won't go to anaerobic, it'll go to aerobic, so there's no methane, but also that Norm is actually collecting that methane from Mullaberry site, and there's cogeneration of electricity. So there's a whole lot of stuff already that we're doing.
And I actually met with Norma last week and had a really good chat, and they were very keen for things like that to be highlighted in our plan to kind of make those connections. They're doing wonderful things, and they're actually very, very keen to potentially have some kind of workshop as well. So that was a very productive meeting. Yeah,
because when I read that in that report, I thought, well, what are you doing? You know, we don't need to do very much because Norma's actually doing that.
Tim. Yeah. Tom next. Tim.
if you do get to read the non-dystopic future scenario, Norma plays a key part in that and what it's achieved in a whole range of things, including energy production.
Tom?
And I believe we should actually reflect and congratulate all these councils for their work, because like many of the people within the community, they don't actually understand what's going on and how good the, like Gola has actually invested in all this kind of work. And we have to say, well, acknowledge that as a part of the, the document that we're doing. And, that this is just like the journey that we'll be going through 2050 or whatever number we put there. So I think that it should be part of the document. And because I didn't know some of the facts that we should all know about living in Gola.
And I think, we've got kind of highly motivated, environmentally minded individuals around this table, and I know that I wasn't aware of as much of what Normal was doing. And I'm also thrilled that they're doing styrofoam recycling. So I took advantage of that when I was going past all the styrofoam that I couldn't bear to put in my landfill for years. It's been around the side of my house. I finally got rid of it. Yeah, I'm really excited about exploring more connections between the work that we're trying to achieve and what they're already doing, and how we can support their work and how their work can support, what we're trying to do as well. So it was a lovely meeting. It was a really positive meeting. Okay, moving on. So 5.2.2 recap on the Community Actions Workshop. Is that Jim?
I'm not sure if it's me or us, that one. We captured what we discussed at the previous meeting as a kind of précis with ideas in there. And I hope that those who weren't able to be at the meeting have had a chance to look at that. I understood that, Jack, you wanted to touch on this a little bit about the idea of involving the Gola Youth Advisory Committee, and also we've still got an outstanding action on us to attend at a Gola Youth Advisory Committee meeting where we can have a further discussion. So I need to contact Erin to get us on the agenda. But that's going to happen. But anyway, happy to discuss any part of the workshop that we need to revisit or reflect on.
Does anybody have any thoughts, or have they read the document or wanted to add that? Yeah, go for it.
So with the Youth Advisory Committee, there was that motion that I got through our group regarding sort of like sitting down with some members of the CEAP action group to sort of discuss one-on-one, similar to what Catherine and I think Nathan did with councillors. And so I sort of incorporating some of your notes, Catherine, I wrote some questions and I sent that to Cody and Nathan for sort of just their initial feedback, sort of relating to sort of how would they rate their sort of experience and knowledge of the topics, like whether or not we're reaching out into the community far enough to sort of reach, I suppose, younger people. Anything surprising in sort of what we've released so far, sort of from the minutes, because I give monthly updates to the Youth Advisory Panel on sort of what's happening in these meetings, sort of interesting notes, and sort of asking for their feedback. And also I like your thing about the top 3 climate actions and top 3 actions for community, so council and community aspects. So I incorporated those, but it's just sort of when we sit down with them and try and like sort of gain an idea of what is the ultimate sort of goal. Like, are we trying to sort of figure out, like, from a youth perspective, what we should be doing? Are we trying to see if we're doing enough, or if we need to go a bit further? So I just wanted to get everyone's sort of thoughts on the matter to sort of help streamline those questions, because they're only a very rough draft, and to sort of make sure that they're effective in capturing the information that we need to make the plan successful and effective in the future.
Thanks, Chair. I think in the notes from the workshop when we had our brainstorm session, there was about 3 points that we captured that related to your query about what are we trying to do here. And I think it was, yeah, the 3 dot points was, one was factual information on what the future life with the altered climate might actually be. So in terms of what's coming down the kind of pipeline, what they can do, if they, particularly if they don't, own a car, have a house bill, so kind of a real, I suppose, targeted action list or priority list or something for people that don't have, assets and perhaps at times I think when you're younger, you tend to be more junior in the workforce as well, so you don't have that kind of positional power to kind of try and make change in any workplaces as well, so kind of approaches to that. And then also in terms of specific actions for younger people, I think that was one of the items there. So that's kind of, I suppose, where we came to in the workshop, and I felt that they were really valid. The other thing from, I suppose, our working group's perspective is I was really, really keen to acknowledge the primacy of a connection with the younger generations, because as we all know, they're going to cop it. They're going to be more affected. A lot of people who are on the younger side now already haven't lived in a year of average global temperatures already. So yeah, really, really keen to acknowledge that and to make sure that whatever we come up with really does tick their boxes. So for me, I would be asked, if we're going out to younger people, we're going to go, well, how can we work with you to get this information from you, and what do you want? What is it that you're coming up against that you want help with or that we can do? So they're the kind of 2 things, in how do we engage with them to get that information, and then secondly, what is that information? I think that's kind of key to how we can then, to make sure that the plan is as relevant as possible. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And I really like that sort of overall theme of empowering young voices, like that fits in with the point of the YAC in general, is to give a voice. So yeah, I'm going to take that on board and sort of keep sort of expanding the points into how sort of can we provide a good platform for the future inheritors of the area and the future leaders of our communities. So yeah, thank you.
And I think to some extent, young people, if they don't have positional power, then they have to try and influence. And that comes back to campaigning. Campaigning 101 ideas about aspects that you can do. So becoming familiar with those kind of things. And I would say that there's a number of groups that already exist that have some quite good resources. So it'll be groups like 350. It'll be groups like, clearly the, Climate Reality Project. But, that's got aspects of youth, but not focused on youth. The other one would be AYCC. That would be another key youth-based organisation that probably has, campaigning ideas or tips in terms of how do you affect change without being the boss of things. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on? No? Okay. The 5.2.3 content on the 4-page brochure, Tim, is this where you're kind of saying, well, what is it that we definitely want in there? Is that your thinking, or is that something that we've already discussed earlier? And we kind of
discussed it earlier now.
Yeah, and we kind of said, it's perhaps a little bit earlier. Yeah, Tom?
Sorry. I just wanted to sort of suggest to Tim that maybe utilising some kind of infographic would help us sort of present the plan in a lot easier way to digest from the, community. So, there are some good examples of like in energy field that, most of the new rules and changes of the market are represented in infographic these days. So I think it could be like an easier way to digest complex issues and stuff like that.
I think step one is figuring out what content we need in it, and then we kind of go, okay, well, and then how do we do it? And we'll be able to see lots of good examples. I suppose from, thinking about it, I would have thought that, you know, the key piece of information is we're here now, we need to get to here, and these are the actions and the changes that need to be made. So similar to, I think, exactly what we've been looking at in that graduated graph from the American town that we all can't pronounce, in terms of that decline in emissions, and each chunk that goes, there's some description around, well, okay, this is, so I think, you know, if we were to convert pie chart chunks into those rectangles and then start identifying the actions that either the council has already done or is in the process of doing, like the classic example for that would be the street lighting. And then there's a number of other things you can actually say, well, you know, this is stationary energy and this is how we're going to fix stationary energy. And I think if we were to start using that I see that document or that diagram as quite intuitive. It kind of makes a lot of sense, I think. So I would be saying that that could be a first pass, at least, is presenting it like that. And also, if there's any other content that you think is absolutely critical that should be in there, we could potentially flag it to Tim now so that when we go away, we've got that itemised.
I have my views on when this 4-page brochure needs to be ready to go. And it's just, you know, to put it to the work group, are we looking at doing it in connection with the plan, prior to the plan, at the same time of the plan? Same time. And again, it comes back down to our target audience and the words that we use in this brochure, because it's very critical that it's done in a way which A, doesn't confuse, B, doesn't get them off on the wrong side, and C, it does provide information on, you know, what we're trying to achieve in a very simplified manner, I suppose you could say, that is easy to understand. It gets the message across, and it doesn't create controversy, I think, which then would, I think, create even more confusion over the plan itself. So it has to be a very carefully worded brochure or information package or sheet.
Tom?
Would it be just the executive summary boiled down to 2 pages?
Or something similar, but executive summaries are generally pretty dry, so I think we'd be trying to make it a bit more graphic at least.
I think from the feedback that the consultant Edge Environment gave us, they were really saying, well, you've got within 400 to 800 words, you've got to have a really nice looking document that captures it in 2 pages, maybe 4 pages, and that's got to have something about the council. Why is the council embarking on this? What made it declare a climate emergency? And that was something that I'd never really considered because it was done before I got here. So you've got to sort of capture that background, you've got to describe why it's important, what the emissions are for the community, and then how it can reduce its emissions with a positive vision for the future to get down to a carbon neutral, safer place to live and work and exist into the future. So that's the sort of challenge that I see. It's probably more than an exec summary. It's more like a really condensed version of the key ingredients in a way that's presented really well. And I think infographics will be absolute key to it.
Durban went down this road as well and have produced, I think, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 pages, but there was a 9, was it, which was the shortened version of the big plan. But again, it was quite a detailed document, and I think the level of our information and data will be just as detailed. How do we then, you know, collectively identify what is, you know, critical to be in this document and what is not, and, you know, what are the messages that we're trying to achieve? So, you know, having done a few of these in the past, it's quite an exacting science to get it right, and I think this committee will certainly put some effort into getting a document that does that well. That's how I would see it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're still gathering data. We're still gathering data. We're still, you know, problem solving, approaching it. So yeah, once we kind of, yeah, and I think as we're progressing too, I think things are becoming. Word escapes me, but kind of where things join up and the possible options are reducing, because with the input that, you know, Paul has highlighted in your approach in terms of adult education, which totally aligns. I think everybody here's aligned with that. Also, in terms of the feedback that we got from the consultants, that was aligning again. So I think we're getting some kind of guide rails along the way, and we will get there. Yeah.
Could it be a evolving document in the sense that, like, say every financial year or something, like we just have like a continual, like, why did we declare, where are we now, what are our goals, and I can continually sort of update it, going like, well, we've achieved these things over the past 12 months, we're now aiming at these, and something just to continually just, you know, it can be sort of done in a graphical way, sort of like be like targets or something like that, and I'm not sure, I'm not too creative, but something that can sort of visualize success and moving forward and sustainability in that sort of visual community-based style?
I would hope so. I mean, ultimately it's a decision for the council to take in terms of keeping our feet to the fire, I suppose, in terms of keeping progress. But I would certainly envisage that would be the best use of the document, to use it as a continually revised and focused efforts. Anything else? Cool. Okay. So next item is engagement with the Gawler Business Development Group. Joe?
We actually spoke with Karen at the last council meeting and said we'd like to either engage with or invite you to our working group meeting here. Either option is open to them. They're quite happy to have us actually attend one of their meetings, or Karen and I think Louise Drummond would come along to ours. The whole aim is to, you know, listen to, you know, who they represent, and listen to how, and then to sort of discuss what is it that we can do, what is it that they can do, you know, in this space, because it's part of the community that I think we're sort of not spending much time with. It would be nice to get a bit more involvement in this space with that group, and there's some great people that sit on that business development group that could, you know, have some great ideas and listen to what we're doing, and then find some synergies. We've had some initial discussions with them earlier on. We have a small working group that meets, I think, every month just up the road with Karen and Louise, and we've already painted a bit of a picture as to what this group does and what we're here to achieve. So they're quite happy and are willing, and are looking forward to sort of getting together and having a bit more discussion, robust discussion around, you know, what can we do in this space within our Gawler business group and community. So a positive, I think there's a really good opportunity there.
Jim?
So after struggling to find a time to actually meet with them, I've invited them to have a workshop, which just happens to be at the same time as our next meeting. So we should have at least Karen and one other person, and others are welcome as well. And we can actually listen from what, you know, a business perspective needs. What are their ideas? What do they want to see in a climate emergency action plan? What would help them? And we can sort of, the same way we had this really healthy discussion around community actions, we can have that healthy discussion on business ideas and actions as well.
I don't think that the business sector, you know, has had an opportunity to hear about, you know, emissions using gas, you know, food businesses that do things a certain and in a particular way, but at least listening to the other options that are out there and listening to what it all means and making some, you know, sense over and about the work that we're doing, so they fully understand the options that are available to them. I think that's a critical part.
And I think the fact that we've now got the snapshot where we can actually point to chunks of different types of energy, and we can actually say, well, you know, this is the commercial use of energy, this is the commercial use of gas, and these are the chunks that you might be able to help us in dealing with. So actually, and then of course, clearly, everybody also has a home, mostly. And so we can actually say, well, actually, you can also see that there's this huge chunk of residential energy use as well. So, you know, yeah, those are kind of, but I'm looking forward to having a workshop with them. I think that'd be really constructive. Any other? No? Okay. You've already covered the next item, I think, the engagement with the YAC. Is that, or is that you? Yeah, that's what, yeah. All right, so nothing to add on that one. Does that mean we can move on to 5.3 electric vehicles?
Well, we've still got time, have we? That's going to be fantastic. We had a meeting with the fleet manager and the financial manager at council a few weeks, or last week, maybe the week before, and we looked at how to do the financial evaluation on a life cycle basis of electric vehicles versus other vehicles. And we looked at, yes, there are various options out there, but the Better Fleet option gives us something that we can use, and it's very flexible in its approach, so I'll run through that in a second. But what we got was in principle agreement for myself and Tony Bizai to prove up a couple of models, get the assumptions right for a couple of particular vehicles that are due for replacement next financial year, and then we can try and put in a business case for to have them change and have electric vehicles come in as an initial trial, or maybe even go further. So that was a really positive discussion, and I'd like to show you the model as it's been developed and run through some of the things.
I was told I was finished.
Yes, so we picked on
So
Jack.
is this a different, is it, because you're originally talking about what you can do via trellis, and then there was the other model that they've been using, and this is a third new thing, is it?
Trellis is a data collection model. The other one, Unico, is a fuel recording data collection tool. This is an evaluation model. This is different.
Right, okay, cool. Yep, sure, yep.
I'm so sorry.
Can you drive from up there to that front?
Okay, so I'm going to open a project that I prepared earlier, and hopefully I can still see how to use it. Oops, I've got it logged out of the session. That's the other thing, it locks you out really quickly. So you can log in and it's my password now. Yeah. Save it. So I'm going to open the project, and this is, we'll pick on Jack's vehicle, because we just love to pick on Jack.
I wanted a Tesla, but it didn't.
Oh, it didn't get up, darn it.
Now, I need to find a way to increase the size of this. What's that do up there?
Those are the three dots on the right.
All dots. 3 dots.
And zoom up.
Okay. I'll zoom up. So this compares, you can compare up to 5 vehicles, but when I did that, they always crashed. So I ran them up and I said, they don't compare more than 1 or 2 or 3. So I've just done a Nissan Leaf to replace Jack's Nissan X-Trail. It's only an example, Jack. So now the numbers are all wrong, and I went through this with the managers, in that we cannot actually sort of say that this is the outcome, because there are so many dependencies. So I'm going to optimise this now and go into some of the things that we've looked at that better gives you the options of choosing. So this model lets you decide whether you want to actually buy a vehicle in cash or financial lease or operating of lease. So that gives you some opportunity. And we had a really useful discussion about the way that Lloyd purchases vehicles. It might be better to actually lease them rather than purchase them. That deals with a lot of the changeover difficulties. So then the other thing was purchasing price. Now there's a default price for a vehicle, but you can actually put in a real price for a vehicle. So if we are really getting close to the vehicle and wanting to use this to make a decision, you can bring up the dealer and say, what price can you give me? And then you can do the life cycle analysis on a real price.
Or object also a backwards of the price on that.
Yeah. And then servicing the tyres. So there's, depends whether it's a model, a manual, and electric vehicles hopefully have a different servicing structure, because you don't need to do all of the work to the engines, you don't need to change the oil, you don't need to do all those sorts of things. There's a residual value depending on how you do it. Now, they can depreciate using an Australian Tax Office model, and all of the assumptions and details are there, so finance can see that. If they don't like it, they can give us something else. Or they can do a manual calculation and just say, well, this is what the residual value is. Or they can do put their own beta model in, something that the council's developed in-house. So it gives you all of that flexibility. The operational term typically use 5 years, but if it's a high mileage car, they might change it every 3 years. So you might sort of alter that. Because some of our vehicles drive a long way, some drive very little. And if they're not driven much, then they'll have a 5-year operational term. The annual driving distance gets put in, so you can put it down suited for the driver and the history of their driving, which is really useful as well. You can put in the percent of personal use. That's really important for fringe benefits tax, and then the charging equipment as well. Now, this one's very important because if you don't put something in there, it's comparing the cost of fueling electric vehicles at zero whilst the cost of fueling fossil fuel vehicles at the default fossil fuel cost. So that needs to really be turned on. We need to have an idea of how we're going to charge these vehicles and where we're going to charge them from and what it costs. So we need to put in some sort of sensitive kilowatt hours and work on that. But it's all possible, it's all achievable, and it's a very flexible model. It'll calculate greenhouse gas emissions for the vehicle that you've selected, for the kilometres that you're going to travel, and all the other things. And then you can go back and do its competitor, and have a look at that one as well. So we've looked at this next trial, but we can also look at for the missing lead. There's probably a couple of different things. I'm not sure whether it's exactly the same anyway. I won't go into all that detail now. I just thought I'd show you the program. It's a really useful program, but it goes a lot more than just looking at the upfront price plus the resale price.
If you go back to the next trial, just reopen the link, so that's something that just out of curiosity, what we do is we the money costs.
You'll have a look at everything, so $30,000 up front. That would be the price that the system puts in. Cash price, $30,000. Servicing tyres. You either use a model value for maintenance cost or a manual maintenance cost. So Tony Gizzo will say, well, how much are you spending on servicing that vehicle every year? And you can put a manual entry in for that. The residual value, operating term, driving distance, personal use, all those things. And that's what fuel cost. Somewhere, I forget where you optimise these, because in setting up the models, you put in diesel prices and things like that. The other thing is looking at cost per kilometre is really annoying to me. I like to see what the costs are for the whole term. So if you click that one and run the model, run the report, I've got to click that car, and then run the comparison report for the defaults that we've set. And then what happens? It all turns blue. So gives you this leaf versus the next trail, gives you the number. I don't have much confidence in you sort of say this is the right or the wrong number at the moment because we haven't done that work to get the assumptions right. Certainly one's got a lot less tailpipe emissions, total cost operating dollars per kilometre, and the other one's got much different output in emissions, so the X-trail's a lot worse than the leaf. And some other charts and graphs there. It's got the assumptions of $1.55, $1.50 per litre of petrol. You can change those. So with COVID, it's a little bit lower now, but before that, we were pushing up towards $2 a litre. And it's got the public charging cost or the cost of charging as well. So you can be really upfront about what your comparisons are, what your assumptions are. Got peak electricity rate, a bunch of other things in there, operating term.
So how do you depreciation rate on the vehicle? That was the big issue there with comparison with the depreciation rate.
Well, it either uses the Australia tax office model. Sorry?
I think that big bit is the depreciation, the grey bit is the depreciation of the...
Yeah, well, you have to follow what it's doing in the model.
Did you set that or
It gives you the option, you can use the Australia tax office rate. You can put in your own figure based on what you think that you can resell that vehicle for, or you can use a beta model that the council may already be using for other depreciation of assets. So that has to be entered into. We need to agree on it and use it.
But then it's made up figures.
Well, that would be the default figures that's in it. So depreciation 0.36%, tax for registration 0.2%.
The service and maintenance is more for the lead than it's the extra. So it's sort of
Service and maintenance is 0.7 on.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to be intuitively.
No, it doesn't seem back. It doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again,
But they're
I'd
all
say,
settings. They're all settings that we aren't sure are right yet.
I know, but it's just
I
That
can't
particular
defend,
example seems to be.
it's
Yeah.
right.
but I think it's a well set up comparison. So people rubbish in and get rubbish out. If we put the best data that we've got in the finance agree with, then it should give us a really good answer from that.
So that statistics is sort of trail, but just can you highlight the leaf? Just go across. No,
Not the limit.
yeah, if you go to the next part, there you go. So we've got 17% depreciation on the leaf.
And I might have set up each of those models because I was setting them up and picking things at random. This is not a true comparison.
No, you just
I
chose the
picked one model for one, and one method for one, and one for the other. So I had to get those that were right.
Isn't registration 4%?
The benefit of this is like an off-the-shelf model that you can then use, and then you can, you know, put in the right information as you're using it, but it's just saves you that time of creating one. Yeah.
And it's got all these assumptions, got pages and pages of assumptions that you want to read up on anything. If anybody disagrees with a particular part, you can sort of identify where you disagree with it and what needs to be done to fix it.
I thought registration is always based on the number of cylinders.
I've got ourselves. But the same amount.
Okay, so I'll close this down now.
Does anybody have any questions for Tim about this? No? Okay, well, that looks like a very useful tool.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I think the next two items in terms of 5.4, we're covered on the updated of the snapshot data. Just, Paul, you might be interested to know that I asked for more detailed information from Snapshot around how they have handled waste emissions. And so they've actually, I just got a response today, so I'll forward that to the group. And I also undertook to forward it to the people I met at Norma as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's in the methodology in Snapshot, but they actually kind of picked out the bits and talked about how they manage that. So, yeah, that was quite useful.
Did they base that on landfill, or did they base it on photo emissions from waste?
I can't remember, but there was layers of it. There was layers in terms of the way they dealt with the data. So they dealt with aspects of what they're doing. They also took into account capture and use of the methane. They also took into account population and where the population is. Yeah, because my question was the percentage of waste emissions for Gawler was a little bit different to the other participating councils. So I thought, so that was, I was kind of saying, well, why is that? And I mean, also when you look at the scale of the emissions of other councils, like there's so much more than what we've got. So I was going to go, yay.
That brings a lot of problems in those two other councils.
Yes, that's right. And there are shared problems because it's a shared facility. So, but, that's also an opportunity for us to be able to, influence the better via Norma and kind of saying, well, look, this is what we can do with Norma and, we can try and be the good council. I know there's a lot of difficulties with contamination. I know that varies by council area. So, yeah, that's that.
I set up an operational working group within Norma, and that's one of the things we're targeting. It's coming from the board, the FOGO program, which is now gaining momentum. It's gaining state government and federal government support.
Yeah.
And we are of the three leading in Gawler. So that's a good positive story.
It is, and the City of Halifax Bay, in terms of doing their green bin trial with green bin, people opting in and getting a green bin pickup weekly and their red bin fortnightly. So it was an opt-in trial.
Yeah, but more. Yes.
I'm sorry?
I think by law you have to pick up the red bin each week.
I think it was a trial for a number of customers or residents at Halifax Bay. So
Metropolitan, it's weekly, and in rural community, fortnightly.
Yeah.
It's something that you can often put bin up.
You don't have to put the bin,
Yeah.
it has to be offered. You have to, and the cost is running the truck around.
We went through this, and it was going back a few years ago. Going back a few years to switch off too. Going back a few years ago, we did propose to go to a fortnightly red bin. That was decisively objected to by the government, and they actually enshrined it in legislation that it'll be a weekly service for your hard waste. We now have to be smarter about how we do things because the contamination rates are absolutely staggering in terms of what goes into the recycled bins. Not particularly in Gawler, but some of the other subsidiary councils which have been looked at.
And Norma's looking at different.
And I think it's clearly one of those things that you can't put the cart before the horse on that problem. You have to make sure that people need it less. Because I look at, my street and, I mean, I don't have a lot of rubbish, but there's people that fill their bin every week and more. So clearly you kind of need to try and solve that problem. But, it'd be nice to get the kind of packaging covenant stuff progressed better and things because it's a lot of work for people. It's really difficult. It's, recycling well is actually a really difficult task, even for the most highly motivated recycler. So, yeah, there are lots of barriers of difficulties, and it's not just about Norma and it's not just about our residents. It's actually about the way products are packaged and what that packaging is made out of that is making it so difficult for everybody. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
And part of that is also Norma lobbying manufacturers of packaging to actually change, what they use and how they do it and rethink the whole packaging And if you all sort of just recently seen the launch of the new ban on plastics, which I think will be after COVID. I think that the government has come out, but they are going to really target food packaging specifically, and I think it's a great outcome.
It's crazy. There's, you know, and I've seen examples, and it's one product that you buy, like one item, and it's got about 4 different materials in it that you have to kind of pull apart and recycle. The top different to the bottom, different to the pull-off lid, different to the cap that's sat on the top. It's just crazy. But anyway, okay.
Could I just suggest something? Like, so rates, like household rates cover the Norma pickup, right? So if we included some like brochure in the rates that get mailed out to people that still take in mailed rates, would it be worthwhile sort of including some sort of like information on what goes where to sort of re-educate? Okay, right. We get ours digital, so we don't see that. So yeah, okay, that's good. That's happening.
You can't see it.
No, it's
It should be attached as a PDF file to your digital.
it's all. Yeah.
I think also like just actually using Norma, because it's such an amazing facility, and being able to take your styrofoam down there or whatever it is once you get familiar with it, because I hadn't gone there before, so it's always that like level of familiarity and actually getting people there somehow or other. I think, you know, that could be something that we include in our plan is, you know, how do we raise the awareness of the work that's already been done at Norma, and giving people ideas on what they can do best to utilise it. Both. Yeah. I didn't get a tour at the MRF, but I had the meeting there. But I did call into Bell Chambers Road to drop off my styrofoam if I've got the sites right. Yeah. I've never been to either, so it was you know, it was really good. Yeah. And they've got a new education centre there and whatever, but, you know, yeah. I think it's interesting. It's kind of like SA Water has always been kind of, we just deal with whatever comes down the pipe, you know, that's always been their approach. And they're kind of always capable in terms of dealing with that. And Norma's kind of changing the dialogue a bit, I think, in terms of it's not just accepting what's coming down the pipeline to them. They're trying to actually actively advocate for better outcomes and you know, better packaging and at least stuff that is easier to sort. And one of the conversations we had was around other resources or materials that are coming through their waste line or their waste process that they can't currently use or they can't currently recycle. And you know, they'd said that they had thought about running like a workshop to, like, you know, you'd get materials engineers or chemical engineers or whatever it is to say, well, actually, what is this stuff and how can it possibly be reused? And then looking at social enterprises to butt off Norma and kind of go, well, actually, this particular product is something that this, you know, waste stream is something that we can value add and kind of close the loop on that. So, yeah, we kind of, you know, had some chats around that, and that's clearly work is in progress at Norma already. So I think there's a lot of overlap with what they're doing, and then, you know, how we could potentially, you know, support that and benefit from it as well, I suppose. Any other thoughts or comments? I think the last two things, communications, we've pretty much covered actually, I think, because we're talking about the update of the snapshot and then the highlighting the document from the San Luis Obispo, which was linked. So unless anybody had any particular comments, I think we are almost at the end and we've got 20 minutes to spare.
There was also something on LiDAR which came through very late and I didn't put it into.
Oh, right, it wasn't on the agenda, right, yeah.
Just Town of Gawler paid to contribute to achieving a LiDAR layer and a LiDAR report on tree canopy data for the town of Gawler. We didn't actually get the whole town of Gawler for some quirky reasons, but we've got 2 areas within the town of Gawler where they've done some really good work. And this data is now going to be placed on the state government heat map web page. So there'll be another layer that people can look at, drill down to, zoom down to, learn more about what our tree canopy is doing, what our percentage canopy cover is, the types of trees. It actually goes down and looks at the individual trees. So it's really quite useful for planning. We need to find ways to actually discuss this with our open space teams and ensure that they can use the data, they can use heat mapping and this together to assist in planning. They can also look at some of the socio-economic layers on that heat mapping website so they could prioritise areas where people would really benefit from having cooler places. So I think it's really interesting work. We've been a little bit out of it. I wasn't able to attend all of the meetings. I've only just sorted out my team's access, but this work has been bubbling away, and I did share the vegetation analysis report, which was prepared just for the town of Gawler, so that's really interesting to read. And it will go live on the 28th of September. I'm not sure whether we need to advise council whether we can bring that into the report afterwards, because it's something that we've already agreed to support. It's just really happening, but I'm happy to take the opinions of the elected members here. And it's just going to mean that Gawler is included with the Greater Adelaide in all of this additional information we've got.
Because there was that story a year and a half ago, actually, they said Gawler was like cities of the yeah. So this is a follow-up on that, I reckon. Yeah.
Will that, could I include that in the report going up to October, that this has been done? That'll be after the release, but I think I can't see anything hugely political about this. I've provided the media release to Donna just in case.
We were part of a broader project on this, and I think that's the merits of it. I think it's worthwhile bringing it into council.
What was the limitations around the bits of Gawler that it did and didn't do? And is that something that's going to be rectified, or is that just something the way it is?
I haven't found out the complete story of it. There was some constraint that they had on some sort of data angle, and they weren't able to do the whole local government area like they were with some others. There were two cities they had a problem with. It might have been Playford and Gawler for some other reason. It'll be rectified in time, but it's not going to be rectified right now.
Which bits are we missing?
So we've only got, if you look at the report, it's got 2 sample representative areas in there. That's where they've done this additional assessment. I can't really fully answer the question because I haven't actually got into this work and studied it to great detail. I can see other parts of this, so I'm not sure.
What we might do, Catherine, before that meeting is actually talk to Aerometrics and find out, what were the issues, and then have perhaps a paragraph or 2 around that, and what they will be doing or we will be doing to resolve.
Yeah.
If we're going to use it as a tool going forward, we need to try and make it effective. So if it's missing bits, we need to make sure that if we adapt to the shortcomings, that there's ways of then making sure that the initial use of that information isn't become irrelevant when we get better updated data or the model, that it matches. There's ways of adapting it going forward, because we're always going to have problems with models. There's always going to be limitations, but it's like how do we use it so that we don't have non-comparing years, for instance. Like I would not want to see that happen where we have year A can't be compared to year B because of the or we can't identify what the differences were between year A and year B to be able to give us that level of certainty that we've actually achieved a certain percentage of canopy cover increase or whatever it is that we might be aiming for. Any other questions on that topic before we move on? I think just the last item now is about scheduling of meetings. So is this about like which day to schedule it?
Correct, and it really stems from the last council meeting where We had some excellent responses around the minutes, and I think the elected members were happy with the content and the way that the minutes are presented. It's just the timing. We're a month late, and that's Councillor Fraser has mentioned that a few times, and I think the Mayor as well sort of suggested it would be great to get the minutes straight from the meeting right at the next council meeting. So it's just...
Is it possible to bring it forward a week, a meeting on a Wednesday?
But that clashes then with, I think, there's a couple of committees, we looked at the corporate diary and it was quite chock-a-block. There's a lot happening, audit committees and IES usually is the Tuesday, the first Tuesday, so it would have been straight after IES. Second Tuesday. Well, this is the third Wednesday. That will be the second Wednesday, so you'll have IES or another committee.
IES on the Tuesday.
Tuesday, which will be the night before this, so does it matter?
Okay. We've been up to meetings.
It really comes, we're really at the,
If we were to shift it a week, does that completely resolve the turnaround issue?
I think so, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just need to check that moving it a week earlier doesn't create any conflict with any other meetings that are occurring potentially on the Wednesday or the Monday or the Tuesday before.
We could...
Actually, Megan's got the council diary up, I think.
Cody, did you?
Yeah, just to say that even one day would, I think, resolve the issue. I think the issue is we're just exactly on the day before they send out the agenda. So, it's just a awkward timing there where it just always means that it's about a month and a week apart from when it shows up at the council.
What we could do is perhaps send a doodle poll around with perhaps if the staff could look at the diaries, particularly of the congested diaries of the elected members, and come up with some suggestions. And then, because I don't have a problem with the date changing if it solves a problem and doesn't create problems for other members of the working group. So would that be a pathway forward that we could do? Have a look at the diary to see where we're at, and then come up with some options and send a doodle poll around to the working group.
I think I've heard two different suggestions. One is to look at having it the week before on the Wednesday. The other suggestion was maybe having a look at a different day, which could be up to a week before. So we could send a doodle poll around and chat with council and see if there's other alternatives in that.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two aspects. There's the council calendar in terms of the commitments of the councillors, and then there's like everybody else in the group. So, yeah, let's leave it to the staff. We don't need to resolve this tonight, but we can go through that process. You can kind of go a couple of options that might work from the... Yeah.
Whatever decision we make, we still report to council at the October meeting. Just to make it clear to all the elected member body that this is the reason why we have it there, or whether we can move it to another night prior to that, in order to get the minutes on time. Otherwise, we just cannot get the minutes out by 11 a.m, 12 a.m, by lunchtime tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's,
The minutes, because we cover such technical and diverse stuff, when you first get the minutes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done just to bring them into a shape that other people could understand. It's, you know, Megan and Shannon do a great job when they take the notes, but more work is needed, and it takes me time to do it as well.
And I think the positive from this is the support from the councillors that they are easy to read, they do make sense, and they do take, you know, Councillor Fraser was saying it does take her on a journey, and she understands what we're doing when she reads the minutes, which is a great outcome.
okay, all right. I think we've figured out how we're going to go through that. Are you happy?
Yeah, I've got one more thing to say.
Oh, go for it, Tim.
Just another really positive note. Had a great chat with Mayor Redmond the other day in the kitchen, very enthusiastic about progress on electric vehicles, and it was nice to sort of hear that sort of support. So we'll keep on doing the work and putting up something to council in the near future. You didn't say it, no?
Sounds lovely. All right, well, that's really good to know. All right, thank you, everybody. And we have finished with 8 minutes to spare. Yay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.